Hello and welcome to another episode of From the Beginning here on Heavenward Thinking. Today we're finishing off Genesis chapter 41 and we're going to pick up right where we left off last week with Joseph being elevated from prison to second in command over all of Egypt just underneath Pharaoh. So we're going to read starting in verse 41 and then we'll get right into today's topic. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the field surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim, and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. So we see in the second part of this chapter what happens as a result of Joseph's faithfulness and his obedience to do what the Lord wanted him to do and to be in the right place at the right time. So we see that he is elevated. The first part of this section shows us that he gets to go around in Egypt riding a great chariot. He gets a gold chain around his neck, great robes and linens, and all these great things. People get to shout, "Make way" before him. He gets all the pomp and circumstance here in this chapter. He gets honored after being completely dishonored. He was thrown into prison because he was falsely accused. He was left in prison and totally forgotten by a man who promised to remember him, and way before all those things, he was sold into slavery by his own family. So we see that he went through all these difficult times, and yet God provided for him, and God elevated him because of his faithfulness, his obedience to the Lord. He never wavered from his commitment to the Lord. And we've seen that all throughout his story. He remained faithful in each position that God placed him. And now, as the second in command of Egypt and the leader of Egypt, just under Pharaoh's throne-ship, he actually wasn't the one calling the shots, it was Joseph. He gets to do all these amazing things to save the people of Egypt, and then to save people all over the world, because we see here at the end of the chapter, the whole world is coming to Egypt. The whole world is coming to Joseph for food, because they didn't use the years of abundance like the Egyptians did. They didn't have God's blessing on them in the same way that Joseph did here, where Joseph was wise enough to follow what the Lord had called him to do and to be wise enough to be good stewards of the extra grain they had been given during the years of abundance. And so we see that God has him at the right place to save lives, to change lives, to do amazing things just because he is being obedient to the Lord. We also see here that he has a wife, he has 2 children, and that God is restoring to him the things that he missed out on in the land of his family. And we even see here that he names his children in such a way that it points to what God has done in his life, and it serves as a reminder of the awesome things that God is doing for him, despite all the hardship he went through. So we see that the first one, Manasseh, was named because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. And the second son was named Ephraim because God made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. So we see that even at this point, in this story. We haven't gotten to the end. We haven't gotten to the part where he has to confront his brothers and go through all those different things. We're going to get there next week. But at this point, he already sees that God is doing something in his life, that God has blessed him, that God is restoring to him things that he lacked, that he did not get because of his family's treatment of him, all the wrong things that they did and people did throughout time after time, how he was thrown into prison and all these things. But yet God is doing something amazing in his life, and he recognizes that. And that should be the lesson that we take out of this. We as Christians should be able to look at our life and go, even if it is difficult, even if people are against us, mistreat us, do all kinds of terrible things to us, just like Joseph was sold into slavery, we might go through very, very difficult times in our life, yet we should be able to recognize that God is still with us. We should be able to be faithful, just like Joseph, no matter where we are in those circumstances, and we should be obedient to the Lord, because we never know when the Lord is going to turn the spotlight on and remove us from the prison cell and put us in a place of leadership, or a place where we are able to use all those gifts, talents, and resources God has given us to do something extraordinary with the Lord. And we see that here with Joseph. He waited and was patient, and God did something. So also we should be patient, because we never know when that opportunity is going to arise. That's why we got to be always looking for what the Lord could be doing in our life, seeking his guidance, not our own, and seeking his timeline, not our own. Because I think if you had asked Joseph when he was sold into slavery if he'd like to wait all this time, or when he was thrown into prison if he would like to wait years for people to remember him, I don't think he would have said yes. Yet I'm sure when he looked back, as we see multiple times when he looks back, he sees that God did things in just such a way to save lives, to do something good, to make good out of the evil that other people had intended. So we see that already happening in this. And then at the end of the chapter, we get to see that the 7 years of abundance were really amazing. They were crazy, way more than just abundant. So much grain, it was like the sand of the sea, Genesis says. And it says that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. That's an amazing blessing of God. And there are moments in life, there are times in our life where that is the case, where God is blessing us beyond measure, that we can't even comprehend what he is doing, because he is working in so many mighty ways, and he's blessing us so abundantly. But then there are times where we go through famine periods, just like we see here. It goes from one instant, 7 years of great, awesome abundance, and then immediately 7 years of famine. And very, very difficult times. We see that the Egyptians, even though they had all this food, they began to feel the famine, it says. And they cried out to Pharaoh for food, who then sent them to Joseph. And so we see that even though there may be great times, and it may seem like God is blessing us, and it's never going to end, we know that there are going to be times where we have to go through the famine periods, where it feels like God is not there, where it feels like things are going wrong and going off the rails. And yet God is still with us, just like he was with Joseph here in the years of famine, giving him the wisdom, the ability, the sustenance he needed to be able to manage this whole nation, and by extension, much of the world at this point, because all the world we see here was coming to Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe everywhere, it says. So you see what we are able to do when we allow God to work through us, when we're faithful in whatever God has called us to, and when we're willing to go through the difficult times of famine. This would have been a great time for Joseph to go, I think I would like to go into an early retirement. I've had great 7 years here. I'm going to go retire. Most leaders would do that. They see something bad coming and they immediately go up. Yep, I'd like to resign now. Yet we don't see that in Joseph's case. Instead, he continues to do the hard work. He continues to lead the people of Egypt, and he continues to do what needs to be done so that people don't escalate into chaos. And that is because he had that obedience to the Lord, that faith that God was going to be able to pull them through, because he knew that this was going to be just a 7-year period of time. They just needed to get through this time and do what he knew the Lord had called him to do, and that was to be wise, faithful stewards of the grain, so that people would not fall apart during this time, because it would have been very easy for the whole world to collapse at this moment. So we see several different things that we're able to apply to our own lives, and next week we're going to be looking at Joseph's brothers going to Egypt. And so we're going to finally get to see what happens when Joseph is faced with his family? What happens when they're faced with him, even though they do not know who he is yet? And we're going to see how that conflict is resolved over the next several chapters. So, as always, join us next time for another episode of From the Beginning, here on Heavenward Thinking.